Welcome everybody here and online. Welcome, Éric. Just a few words on the project, and then I'll introduce you for your talk. We are a collaborative research project funded by the German government, especially the Ministry for Research, Technology and Space.
Oh, wow.
So thanks to the ministry, we're all here. And we are actually doing a comparative research on extractivism, raw material extractivism in Latin America and the Maghreb, North Africa. The project is based here in the University of Kassel, led by the University of Kassel, and with our partners at the University of Marburg. Our main idea is to observe comparatively similar processes of social change, although we would recognize tremendous differences in cultural spheres, also in the political arena. But actually, what we do is looking at processes of extraction and how extraction shapes entire societies. And what we found out so far is that actually the terms and concepts that we are using are basically shaped by area studies with a very strong notion of culture and language. So what we're talking is about Africa as a continent, Latin America as a continent. What we found out is that perhaps we're using the wrong concepts and terms, and we should better talk about political economy. And especially about how, although there are so many differences, we observe similarities. And similarities are not connected to culture, but to the specific nature, how societies connect to the capitalist world market. So that was we are looking at. And I'm very honored to introduce Éric Pienault, who is an outstanding researcher, especially in the sphere of social ecology. He is a professor at the Department of Sociology at the University of Quebec at Montreal. And he is also director of the Research Center for Resilient Cities. And as you might know, he published a quite famous book, A Social Ecology of Capital, in which he analyzes through the lens of social metabolism that capitalism is destroying nature and the different ways how that happens and how that is connected to the logics of capital. And this is also quite interesting for our project, but as we did not integrate Canada or Germany as case studies, we're especially interested in your empirical insights, apart from your theoretical framework. So welcome.
Thank you.
Here in Kassel. And we'll have a 45-50 minutes talk, with then will lead us to an intensive discussion,
hopefully,
for another 45 minutes. Welcome.
Great.
Your floor.
Thank you. Thank you. And I hope I don't go overboard. I'll at 40
I'll
something.
give you notes.
Yeah, give me something. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to stand up because it's 6 o'clock at night and it's important to be active, and present what's a ongoing research agenda more than finished research. After writing A Social Ecology of Capital, I wanted to focus more specifically on extraction through the lens of social ecology and social metabolism. So this is Accumulation Frontiers is the kind of temporary name of a book project that I have that is the book that follows Social Ecology of Capital, more focusing on investment dynamics. So I'm testing with you theory and empirics. A few words about the title and about the way I approach these questions. You'll notice in parentheses the word Germany and hydrogen, because that's what I want the discussion to focus on, but I'm not going to talk much about that because I'm not an expert of Germany. And hydrogen, you'll see I have one slide on hydrogen and not more, because for now, hydrogen is mostly a specter. It's not something tangible, at least in Canada. I know elsewhere it's going somewhere, but here it's in Canada, it's not. My focus and my work is on Canada, not Latin America, not the Middle East. Canada is an extractive economy since it was invented by white people destroying and colonizing the indigenous people there. It was created to, the whole geographical structure of Canada is around getting stuff out through the Great Lakes and through the St. Lawrence River. So it's really structured by coloniality and by extractivism. And Canada also has a very old school of political economy of extraction, but we didn't say extraction. Back in the 30s, Harold Innis was writing about the staples economy and trying to understand what that means, a staple-led development of a country or of an economy. So we have our own institutionalist approach to which I dabbled in. I do sometimes mobilize Harold Innis, but I also use a bunch of other approaches, as you'll see. I've been trying to understand what I call the capitalist pressure to extract since at least 2010. Doing that because I also tend to work a lot with social movements that are contesting extractive projects around the tar sands, around gas. So for me, that was a concept that was operational analytically, but also it was useful politically to frame things in that way, to say that extractivism for us in Canada is not about demand. It's about pushing supply onto a planet that might not want that supply. So there's an autonomous logic of supply that's at work in Canada. We produce the dirtiest oil, and now with Canada LNG, the dirtiest gas. We're the world champion for the methane leaks in liquefaction this year. We got the prize. So we beat, I forget, a liquefaction plant somewhere in Africa that was the 224 winner. So we're we're really proud. So actually, so this is what I'm talking about. This is how we frack in Canada. So this region here is a forested region just before the Rocky Mountains in BC, British Columbia. And as you can see, it's not the model that we're used to seeing in our imaginary fracking, which would be a bunch of wells peppered. This is the idea of a pad approach. So from one pad, you will have multiple wells. That's one strategy. And then the new strategy that I'll be talking about in my presentation is actually that from this pad, you can do horizontal drilling for about 3 kilometers. And then you go down that way. So, and I'll talk about what that means in terms of analytically. But so that's what we're talking about. And then this is, here's our flaring. that's our, oh, it's dark. Is that normal? It just went dark.
The projector is too dark.
Oh, okay. So you can't see anything basically. Yeah. Because so the PowerPoint is loaded with stuff, but I won't be saying everything on the slide. So if you find what I'm saying boring or incomprehensible, you can read it. But now you can't read much, but it just went dark actually. Did I touch something? Because see, that's not dark. That's dark. That's dark. Okay. Anyway, so we'll use it. And so I'm going to talk about fossil gas extraction in Canada in general. I don't know what you know about. No, that's worse. I can't even read it. I'll start with that. Then some basic notions in socio-metabolic analysis drawn from my work and some data on gas. And then I get into the accumulation frontier model, which is the model I'm trying to develop to understand extraction in Canada from a political economy perspective. And I'm going to say a word on that in a second. And then finally, we'll finish with the gas frontier in Canada and the struggles around the gas frontiers, because again, the research I do is always tied to groups that are contesting these projects. I work with Indigenous people and with settler groups that are contesting projects. So the research is always impact oriented. I like to do it that way. I'm really sorry for that. Maybe it's the color I chose. I don't know.
I think it's because of the light. It's not dark enough in the room.
Ah, okay.
And we are unable to.
Yeah, to control that. Anyway, the PowerPoint will be available.
Because online it's fine.
Okay, so then and we can share it. Yeah, stupid people in intelligent buildings. I love that. Yeah, long live the architects. So and I was presenting this presentation. I was preparing this presentation, and we had a horrible week in Canada with all these announcements. Like yesterday and before yesterday, Shell buys Arc Resources. Arc Resources is one of the biggest frackers in Canada, and Shell had totally pulled out of Canada because they sold all their interest in the oil sands, and they had pulled out of fracking, and now they're back again through this acquisition this week. Our Carney setting up a sovereign wealth fund to de-risk pipelines, basically. And then a pipeline was approved for Enbridge. and then new oil and gas subsidies for CCS and exports. So all this, while I was preparing. So as I said, it's a dizzying week for me, and I'm trying to take into account these, and we'll see at the end, I'll end with some of these. I'm going to have to use this to see what I'm saying, because this. So let's start with fossil gas extraction. I don't know what you know about this in Canada. So if it's, tell me to go like this if it's stuff you know. But the first thing is, well, of course, Canada is the 6th biggest exporter of natural gas. Compared to Russia, we're not that significant, but we're still a big player. And we have very big reserves of natural gas, most of it unconventional. Unconventional meaning that you can't stick a pipe in the ground and expect gas to come out, right? So I guess you're aware of the difference between conventional and unconventional. You have to somehow do a technological intervention to get the gas. The gas is not under pressure in a rock. That's the difference between conventional and unconventional. We passed the conventional unconventional divide in 2015. So now the majority of our gas comes from fracking, and even fracking has evolved. It's become more efficient and much more poisonous too. But and maybe some elements of geography that are important to understand. Most of our hydrocarbons are here in the northwest of the continent, on the east side of the Rockies. So to get that stuff out, we have to go through the Rockies, which is very expensive. The natural, and you'll see it in the next map, the natural output for our hydrocarbons and anything else that Canada makes is just going south. And this thing south here swallows up everything very easily. So we usually tend to just naturally send it south. And then we do have some important gas deposits here, except they're not being exploited in this area. And here, this is in Quebec. Well, in Quebec, we have a law that says that you can't extract hydrocarbons. It was a law passed 4 years ago. It's one of our victories, the environmental movement in Quebec. We're really proud of that. So it's unextractable in the current legal situation. Here again, so maybe you've heard of tar sands. Well, this is Montney. So that word, if ever you hear the word Montney, that's this huge chunk of unconventional gas that we're fracking, and that is being and this is a projection from today to 240 of that. So here's then the pipeline system, how we distribute the gas. This is just for the gas, not oil. So here, this is the pipeline system that for all gas, and this then is from TransCanada Energy. I want to talk about this in a second, but let's talk about this first. So I don't know what you can see, but just to give you an idea, again, everything is concentrated here. These are the collector pipes. And then the challenge is getting it out of the continent or sending it south. So you can send it south and it goes down to this hub here. But if you're not sending it south, then you got to get it to the sea. And this is the big sentence that all the politicians use in Canada, is getting the resources to tidewater. This is an expression in Canada. It's a cultural expression everybody understands. And one of the big problems of getting resources to tidewater is this place here where I come from, where we tend to be very anti-fossil fuels, and our anti-fossil fuel movement is very strong. So we tend to want to block these projects, and they have to go through us. There's no other way to get there unless they go through the US. And then the other problem here is that you've got indigenous communities that are very strong and that are also very anti-fossil fuel. So you have two, and then if you go up north, you've got the same problem. So the only way to go is south. There's no resistance. On the contrary, they tried to resist Keystone XL, but well, it did work, but mostly for economic reasons. Anyway, we can get back to that. Now, what's interesting to note is this is the Canadian system. This is TransCanada Pipeline. They are the gas movers in Canada. They are the ones that monopolize or quasi-monopolize the circulation of gas. It's not a legal monopoly, it's just an economic monopoly. And as you can see, they are actually much more integrated continentally than Canadianly. They bring to the Gulf Coast about 50% of what's going to be liquefied and sent to here or sent to wherever. They control that flow. They control the access to the Permian. I don't know if you've heard of the Permian, but the Permian is a huge unconventional reserve of oil, shale oil and shale gas, much bigger than what we had here and here. So they control that. So they're very important players. So on the one hand, we have let's say, a political reality, which is this. And on the other hand, we have an economic reality, which is this corporation that is very strong and very important. Now, the challenge, the political economy challenge for the fossil industry in Canada is to multiply lines out here and to try to find some way to get to this spot here. Why here? Because if you're here, you're closer to here, which is Germany, than down here. So there's a lot of talk about how do we get here so that we can come to Germany and give you guys our fracked gas. Oh God, I can't see much. Anyway, that's not really important. Okay, I talk about one of the concepts that we use in analyzing the political economy of one little not epistemological thing or something about the way I work. I'm a political economist, but with a very big E and a very small P. So I'm horrible in policy, but I'm a good economist. I did my PhD with Robert Boyer from the regulation school. So that's where I come from. You'll see it, it'll show. So I tend to work on corporations much more than governments. So yeah, just because often it's the other way around. Political economists tend to be big P, small E. So yeah. So like most extractive export countries that you study in your center, we have an export constraint. Our social metabolism cannot absorb the resources we extract at the scale that is economically viable to extract them. If we would bring down extraction to this blue line, which is what we can absorb if we don't do any climate policies, the industry would go broke. They would not make profits. Workers would be unemployed. The infrastructure wouldn't be used enough because it's too big, and thus it would degrade, decompose, and then it would just break down. We wouldn't be able to. So the export constraint comes from this economic fact that the minimum scale at which the industry can thrive is higher than what your economy can absorb. We have this problem in the forestry sector. We have this problem in the oil sector. We have this problem in the gas sector. And of course, we have this problem in aluminum, steel, copper. What else do we export? Well, that's the wheat. Yeah. So we are a rich, but still very typical export extractive country. That's our political economy. That's how we've developed. And as you can see here, the export constraint is growing for gas. Okay, a few words on green hydrogen. For now, green hydrogen is I tend to say a bubble in Canada that never happened or hasn't happened yet. Oh, do I have to move back into I'm trying to see because I can't read there. I'll just move this, actually, it'll take care of the problem. Around 2020, there were over 10 green hydrogen projects announced on the east coast of Canada. Most of them were announced to answer to German demand. Back when there was this discursive bubble around the role of hydrogen in the energy transition. Today, there are only two actively. Pardon me? Oh, okay. So I thought you were completing them. I was like, yeah, two actively, because I'm looking for the word, two active projects. And both are for internal demand and not at all in an export model. The reasons for this are the following. One, all of these projects are thermodynamically crazy. We're taking renewable energy and making hydrogen just doesn't make sense energy-wise. They were all based on inexistent renewable energy that we had to build up and that we need for other purposes in our transition process. They were all technologically unready in the sense that, of course, hydrolyzers, that's like as old as capitalism, fossil capitalism, but okay, you've got the H2. What do you do with it? How do you transport it? There's no technologically viable, at least in Canada, process to transport hydrogen without moving a bomb around, which is what an H2. So that's the big problem. We don't have, is it ammonia? Problems there. Is it these organic substances that we tie the hydrogen to, and then how do we separate it? Will it work? Can it work to scale? So there's a big technological question. So for now, it's just been dropped as a sector. So you're not going to get it from us. I guess Namibia will have to work. Will have to be the place. Okay. So let's discuss then natural gas, because that we are in a position where we would like to sell you our beautiful fracked fossil gas. And to do that, they have to pass a pipeline through Quebec. So that's why I'm working on this right now, because there is a project on the table called Marinvest for a very big LNG project with a floating factory. Anyway, I'll get into the details later, but I'm helping movements I'm working on this project to help movements understand it and see where we can block it, because that's what we to do. So to do this, let's look at some general things on social metabolism and on gas markets. So yeah, as Hannes said, I wrote a book, Social Ecology of Capital. It exists in Germany. If you want, in German, sorry, if you want to read it in German, it's been translated. Just very few concepts, so you know where I'm speaking from. The Social Ecology of Capital as a project was to take let's say, heterodox critical political economy framework, a kind of mix between heterodox Marxism, feminist economics, Maria Mies type approach, ecofeminist economics, and post-Keynesian analysis of accumulation. Take those things on the one hand, and on the other hand, take the socio-metabolic analysis coming out of Vienna and bring them together in a coherent and theoretically sound system. So it's written like a treatise, actually. And out of that project comes a few ideas. One is this idea that we live and our economy is organized as a fossil-based metabolic regime. And this regime has specific characteristics that I summarized in the book. But I think of course, the centrality of fossil fuels. But I guess the one big thing that's important is that whereas in other metabolic regimes, like an agrarian regime or a hunter-gatherer regime, human societies and their economies thrive through ecological relations, are inside ecological relations. If you're a hunter-gatherer, you're literally inside the ecosystem. If you're an agrarian society, you're mediating your metabolism with an ecosystem that you care for, but you have no other tools except your own labor and your own bodily work and those of the animals that work with you to work with this ecosystem. Our societies are the first societies that have broken away, detached themselves from these ecological relations and have put between them and ecosystems, between them and living beings, oil, gas, and coal. So we are primarily in geological relations, and we're facing geological change instead of ecological change. That's, we get what we want. We wanted it, we get it. We wanted geological relations, we end up with climate change and other massive transformations. So I won't get further into that, but for me, it means that we are the first truly extractive societies because we have extracted ourselves from ecological relations. And I think that's an important insight that I take from Latin American philosophers that, I'm an anthropologist. It's not particularly original idea. So then from Vienna, I took just the whole framework, this idea that economies are organized around extraction, dissipation, and a throughput flow that goes through the economy. You can read in the book what this implies, but the important thing is that these relations are the mediations of our relationship with ecosystems and with nature, extraction and dissipation. It is through them that we are embedded in ecological cycles, and they capture the materiality of the economy. And there's much more, but we can't read it. So and I guess when we look at it empirically, I tend to work with mass flow data, thinking if we have mass consumption, mass production, then we have mass extraction and mass dissipation, and everything we dig out has to go somewhere. And this is a throughput type relation. And these extractions and dissipations are border functions between society and nature, and they create certain society-nature relations that are specific and they're problematic. And then we can also measure from that the scale at which we are doing this. And it's interesting to note that globally, we were at 31 gigatons in 1970, and today we're up to 104 gigatons, 223, 225. It's a modelized number, so it's to take with some grain of salt, but 108 gigatons. So we've tripled what we extract in the last 50 years, basically, tripling the, and this is, yeah, it's not on this presentation, but I think it's important to, so the model I use then is Well, I learned this. This is how Robert Boyer and Aglietta and all these people taught me economics. You have a production norm, you have a consumption norm, and in Fordism, we kind of find a way to organize this around mass production and mass consumption, and the wage-labor relation is central to this. And we have from somewhere we don't know raw materials coming in, and we send somewhere we don't know wastes, and that's the end of the story. And most post-Keynesian economics work like this. Marxist economics work like this. Most feminist economics works like this. That's the world that we teach, and we teach this in economic sociology and in political economy. It's basically the framework. So what I tried to do in the book is to widen this by saying that actually we have 4 relations, not 2. And the problem is often that, yes, people will acknowledge that this exists, but they will reduce this to the functional needs of that. They say, well, what we extract is what we need to transform in our productive sector. And what we waste or dissipate is what we've used up in our collective or individual consumption. And the work that I do in the book is to say no. And today I'll be talking a lot about this. Extraction is an independent and autonomous site of accumulation. There are things that happen there that have nothing to do with what that needs. And dissipation is also an independent point of accumulation of capital. And again, there are things that happen here that have nothing to do with that. So whereas this can push into the economy things that the economy doesn't necessarily need or want, this can pull things out at a rate that is probably not the one that would be if they weren't there. And the easiest, for this side, the easiest example is these waste to energy and waste to heat systems you have all over Europe, which is basically an incinerator with a new name. But when you get waste to heat, waste to energy, you get rid of recycling, you get rid of all this, and you need to organize a flow of matter and material into these systems. Otherwise, you'll lack energy. So it creates a pull effect on the whole metabolism. So that's an example on that side. And on this side, well, I mean, nobody wants tar sands for real. Nobody wants tar sands oil. It's horrible. It's so energy. It's so energy inefficient. It's so carbon intensive, but we're able to push it into the global economy. And I'll be talking about more frack gas than that. But one last concept from socio-metabolic analysis. So we have this wider economic understanding that I just showed you here, 4 relations, not 2. And then we also say that social practice and thus accumulation and labor and reproduction always happen in a nexus of 3 relations. You've got social practice tied to material energy flows, tied to what we call material stocks, which is like this building here, a car, a factory, an incinerator, a mine. And the 3 always come together, and each end mediates the relationship between the 2 others. You cannot have relations between stocks and flows without social practice. But you cannot have a relation between social practice and flows without stocks. And just the fact that I'm drinking out of a bottle proves that. I can't just drink the water like this was coming from the sky. And the same thing, we cannot relate to material stocks without flows. This room here is controlling the flow of sunlight and the flow of energy into our, we're not able to control it. So this is, I would say, a methodological construction that is very often, that we use to always take into account this nexus structure. Okay, now moving to gas metabolism. When you start to work on gas, the first thing that that comes up is the fact that it's, even though it's being presented as a transition fuel or a transition energy, it is not. Gas has been, but its period of expansion is the 1970s and onwards. So it's been the most dynamic fossil fuel in the last 50 years. The growth of oil has not flattened, but the growth of oil has stopped increasing. Coal, we keep the same amount of coal. You can see here, it's not increasing that much. It increased just in this period when China was using it, but now it's kind of flattened out. Biomass grew in this period here and it has stabilized. Oil has stabilized. The growth story in fossil fuels is gas. And it's a growth story that goes back to the 1970s. So what's happening today, we have to look at it from a historical perspective, saying this is the continued increase and integration of gas in our energy metabolism. It's not something that is new, that's coming. It's something that is ingrained. Another thing we have to do is to denaturalize gas and oil. We tend to see them as raw materials that exist in and of themselves. And this little triangle that I use tries to do that denaturalization. When we think of oil and gas, we only think of the top of the pyramid. It's basically you take a pipe and you put it in the ground and you hope something comes out. And you hope only one thing comes out. That's the first thing. Often you don't get only one thing, you get at least 3 or 4. You're getting, of course, heavy oil, you're getting lighter oil, you're getting these liquid condensates. So this is gas that transforms into liquid at one temperature, but can go back to gas at another, and you're getting gas. And you have to choose what you do with what. And often you just torch what you don't want and gather what you want, but you have to make that decision. But still, it's there. You put something in the ground and it comes out. We're not in that world anymore. That world is the 20th century. We're in the world of everything else that's under that green zone. And what that implies is it's costlier. And if you've read Jason Moore, then this is all about his story of, the ratio, the ecological surplus declining. So it's all more expensive and it's more highly mediated by technologies of capture and transformation. And as we get down to the bottom, which is where we are today, shale gas, oil sands, coal bed methane, gas hydrates, oil shale, which is the Permian, it's not a deposit. I mean, these are small molecules that are caught up in rock. The technological process to transform them into what we call oil and gas is huge. So these are, if we talk about resource frontiers, we can say that here we have a resource frontier that is just there. But starting down here, we have to engineer that frontier. And here it's totally constructed by technology. But as we've done that, we've widened, and that's why the pyramid is wide, we've widened the amount of oil and gas that exists. So our reserves have gone up throughout the whole 20th and 21st century. That's the weird thing with oil and gas. This peak oil story doesn't work that much because we're widening all the time our resource base. I never bought into peak oil because I come from Canada. You say, well, you've got so much of this stuff. It's like not about to be peak. So yeah, I won't read all through this, but there's a lot of stuff in this little graph, and I think it's very useful. And you could do this with copper, probably. You could do it with cobalt, you could do it with palm oil, you could do it with, I know I took this for the forest, and you could do, so. I guess the thing that I'd like to say now, but that will be more developed in a few minutes, is the more we go down, the more we move from what we call capital widening to capital deepening. And this is a concept that's at the core of my work. So I'll be talking about that I take from post-Keynesian economics. Finally, you really can't see anything. It's such a drag. Anyway, I'll say it then. Here you have geopolitical developments, and here's structural market changes. I can just say it. I'll do as if I had no PowerPoint and just go do the presentation. It's okay. And so, I mean, the geopolitical, yeah. Background to light, and I think it would work. It would take care of the problem. Okay. Does it?
I change every slide.
Can I? Okay.
It's just going down to first.
Maybe it's just that we have to get out. No, it's gonna. I'm sorry about that. I didn't think. Because it's brown, and then black on brown is true if it's white on, because it's nicer for the eyes if you have no light. Then Hannes, thanks. I'm like, so while you do that, I'm going to talk. Oh, you do it once? Oh yeah, cool. Yeah. Oh wow, cool. Okay. Hope things might have disappeared, but who cares? As long as it works. Yeah. Thanks for. Okay, yay. So now you can see, and I don't have to talk anymore. I can just sit down and click. So, geopolitical developments that have transformed the They're transforming the gas market and are transforming the way that we see gas circulating and being extracted. Well, obviously, the Russian, sorry for the mistake there, the typo, the Ukraine-Russian war, obviously, I'm in Germany, you don't have to talk about that. I think you know more than we do. The American fossil offensive, I mean, their idea of an energy dominance policy, which is really important. And then mostly the Iran war now. 3 weeks ago, planet Earth lost 20% of its LNG capacity when they bombed Qatar. So that really is changing, and it's going to take at least 5 years to build that back up. So this is a major development, and the Americans, of course, are really happy about that. And some people would say they even provoked that, but I don't know. I'm not going to go there. I'm not really particularly into conspiracy theories, but I guess they are happy with the outcome. But let's get into the structural changes of the market. I don't know what you know about LNG, so I'll try. If you don't, I can speed up or slow down depending on Hannes. So, well, first of all, fracking is now the new way to take gas out of the soil. I mean, it's not something that it's becoming conventionalized, but that has changed radically the gas markets, because places that were gas importers are now gas exporters, the US and Canada. It's really changed the way we see our reserves, and it's moved the geography of extraction also. Finally, we figured out a solution. Thanks. Sorry.
Yes, yes.
You can control it.
Oh, it is? Because the board is like as if it was only related to the
Yeah, to the screen. I don't.
Probably there should be a button for doing, but it kind of goes.
Oh well.
It's not on that screen.
Maybe
That
it's
screen is only
that black box looks dangerous.
You told me it's on the touch screen, but
Oh, well, there's nothing. I checked
Okay.
that.
get
No.
No, we'll
Yeah, I think we got a solution. Thanks a lot. So the development of LNG in the US is tied to one major development, which is that as the fracking was being developed in Pennsylvania, and then as fracking started also being developed in Texas, there was an oversupply of gas in the Northeast, well, in the East, and in the Permian area. They didn't want the gas. They just wanted the oil in Texas. So they were flaring it all. And gas was considered a waste product. And this is back to 2000. LNG has transformed that waste product into an input, a highly valuable input. So that is a major development. And now everywhere gas has potentially the capacity to become a resource instead of waste. And why was gas a waste? Because our gas systems were continentalized, and they were tied to domestic demand or continental demand. And what couldn't be fitted into a pipe in a continent was just flared away, burnt. By inventing LNG, we created the capacity to circulate globally gas. And this has a bunch of consequences that I think we're just starting to understand today. One of the consequences is that you should not see LNG as a floating pipeline anymore. It's not the idea that there's a facility, let's say, in the west on the Gulf Coast that's got to deal with a facility for regasification somewhere in the Netherlands, and you've just got boats going to and for between these two areas. That type of LNG market does not exist anymore, or hardly exists anymore. Today, we've transformed the LNG market into flexible contracts, and this is mostly because of the EU. The EU negotiated and lobbied very hard the gas companies to move them away from fixed port contracts to permit, and this was during the first Russian, and it was because of Germany, actually. Why? Because Germans and other European countries wanted to outbid Pakistan, India, or other countries when they needed the gas. And to be able to outbid, there's a boat that leaves the port, and you say, how much is that boat worth? Oh, it's worth, I don't know what, 20 million. Well, I'll pay 30 million for it. But then it doesn't go to this port, it goes to that port. But if the contract says it's got to go to that port, then you can't do that. So it was to create this flexible market. And then the impact of that is the other slide that I won't summarize, but the total transformation of the price system, where we've gone from regional prices and prices anchored to oil to this globally integrated price system which is entirely financialized also. And now paper gas is the price-setting mechanism. And this has been associated with the rise of what we call the portfolio traders, global companies like Glencore, but others, that now control the gas market, the global gas market. They get to decide where the stuff goes. And finally, one last structural change, which we're just starting to understand, is data centers. Data centers in the US and in Canada don't trust the grid, the electricity grid. So they do what they call behind-the-meter installations. That means that they buy gas turbines that are smaller, they're about as big as from here, that wide to there, and they install them in lots, and they have like 10,000 gas turbines like this, and then they bring the pipe in, and they make their own electricity for their own facilities. And this is totally transforming, again, the gas market in Canada and the US, creating new spots of demand, and probably diverting volumes that used to go to LNG to that, so it's going to sustain expansion. So it's a growth story. Yeah, these portfolio players, I won't name them all, but just to say the categories are interesting. We've got the integrated majors that are now portfolio dealers in LNG, Shell, BP, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Total. We've got the commodity traders that are also doing it, Vitol, Trafigura, Gunvor, and Glencore, obviously. And we've got the old actors that we always knew, the state-led exporters, the hybrid actors, public-private, Qatar Energy, Equinor in Norway, Petronas. And then finally, well, Germany, your utilities have transformed themselves into portfolio actors in the LNG market. So Uniper, Engie, and Reve. Not Reve, but I always forget how to pronounce that. But yeah, pardon me? RWE are now important players in this portfolio story. And I won't go into all the details, but this is just how the pricing system has changed. If you want to understand that, you can go read the slide and take your time. I'm not going to present all that, but it's just fun to understand the different ways in which there's this global integration of prices. Okay, this was all to get to this part, which is now let's look into the accumulation that is going on at the point of extraction. This is just the model that I use. Capital investment implies two things. On the one hand, fixed capital formation. On the other hand, materially, capital to labor, energy, and matter ratios. Clem. I learned this when I was with Boyer, capital-labor ratio. You can't do ecology with that, so you have to add in energy and matter. And then you get, on the one hand, economic power, and you get material lock-in effects. So, yeah, Clem. And then finally, this is not important. No, yeah, it is. Okay. From my perspective, defining investment this way is a way to understand the identity basis of the capitalist class. Instead of defining the capitalist class through its capacity to own the means of production, I tend to, because I'm struggling against pipelines, I tend to define them through their capacity to invest and to force upon society a future that we can understand, but that they understand because they're investing in things that will structure our economy for the next 40 years. So our struggles, our ecological struggles, are struggles for the shape of the future. And you have a capitalist class that controls the capacity through expenditure to be able to determine that future. So thus you have a fossil capital class, and you have maybe this renewable fraction. You have fractions struggling, but in Canada, we are really dominated by our fossil capital class. And this brings then this idea that when we block a project, we are attacking their class basis. When we redirect capital towards renewables, we are again attacking their class basis. We're telling them, you don't get to decide where to invest. Their identity as a class is to decide where to invest and to get the returns. So the ecological movement challenges capitalism not at the point of production, but at the point of investment. That's where our power lies, but it's also where we're dangerous to them. And that's where our struggles are. Every time we block a project, well, we're attacking that autonomy of investment on which their class identity is based on. And we find ourselves in a weird relation to labor in that context, because labor tends to side with the capitalists on these struggles. So, and this is, I mean, real experience we've had in our struggles in Quebec. Now, if we look at investment more profoundly and we try to analyze it, I want to introduce you to 3 ways to look at investment, and I won't go through all what's in this slide. This is for the book that I'm doing this, but let's start with investment that just reproduces what is. You're just investing in keeping things going. Reproductive investment. Your clem ratio is going down because you're getting less efficient. You're basically trying to project the past into the future. It's a legacy type investment. Capitalism can't thrive on this. This is often managing decline. Most capital investment is always here, either widening or deepening. Widening, it's basically more of the same. So we have fracking technology, and we just expand that technology to new territories. Then we get more gas the same way. So your capital to labor, energy, and matter doesn't change. It's stable, but you're growing because demand is growing. So, or you're growing because you want to control, you want to oversupply the market because you want to have a barrier to entry, which is something that we do a lot in the extractive sphere. And then finally, you have capital deepening. Capital deepening, your capital to labor, energy, and matter is going up. You need more capital for every unit of energy, matter, and labor that, more capital, yeah, instead of down, up. So you're intensifying fixed capital, but you call that innovation, efficiency, and you're transforming the way production is being done. So when fracking was first introduced, that's what fracking was all about. Today, when they use reality glasses, they go into these the mining, mostly oil and gas, but also other mining industries. They'll send their geological engineers in these huge arenas with virtual reality, and what they do is they actually see the deposit. They walk in the deposit to study where they should start mining, where they should start fracking. So it's very high tech. It's not at all. But, in political economy, we tend to, if you've read David Harvey or the Regulation School, we tend to differentiate intensive accumulation and extensive accumulation. They relate to deepening and widening, but of course, it's always a combination. I mean, you can have intensive accumulation, you'll have more deepening than widening, but you still always have some widening. So these for me are the basic building blocks to understand what's happening at the point of extraction. A few words on that. How am I doing time-wise? Have I done half an hour about?
Yeah, so 10 minutes left.
Good, that makes sense. Okay. We have all the tools now. So on that side, just reminding ourselves that if we have mass production and mass consumption, we'll have mass extraction. That extraction is a border relation that materially shapes society to nature relations, and that extraction shapes the capital to labor, energy, and material ratio throughout the whole economy, including the way we use our dishwashers and what we decide to waste and not waste. And finally, extraction is a point of accumulation. It should not be reduced functionally to what production needs. So then this, I guess, is stuff that you guys know much more than me from world ecology, or in general, if you've worked in Latin America, then the idea that it's an ecology is obvious for you. I mean, well, I first encountered the word extraction in my university. It was extractivismo, and that was back in 2012. So it's a word that we took from Spanish. You know, they were Latin America is way in advance on us on these questions. For me, there's maybe one important idea that it's these 3 modes of reification that extraction implies. So for me, raw materials don't exist naturally. They're totally, entirely socially constructed. Matter exists. I mean, there is bauxite, there is forests, but raw materials are. So the first thing is raw materiality is out there. In our ontology, they're out there. We can't see them because they're entangled. But there is copper, there is white hydrogen out there that we can find. So this out there is very important ontologically. Then the second thing is this out there is always a quantum. We can always capture it quantitatively as a potential volume of something. And then the third thing is that we also consider what's out there, what we can count, like the reserves, or the amount of wood standing in a forest, or the amount of fish in the sea that we can fish. We always consider them, they can be appropriated. We just have to find the way to do it. There must be some legal way to do this or non-legal way, but appropriation is always also the idea that we can take them out of their context, technologically and socially, or sometimes violently, is an a priori. So we have three a prioris on the world: that raw materiality exists in and of itself. Second of all, we have these quantities that are just waiting to be extracted. And third, that their appropriation is an a priori. It's just a question of finding the right social and the social and material technologies. And I had some fun taking these three, and I won't talk about this here, but just to know that I had fun taking these three ideas and then looking at it from a Marxist perspective, a post-Keynesian and ecological economics, mostly Herman Daly type approaches. So it was interesting to see. I was trying to understand resource rents, and so I did that. But I won't comment this, but it exists, and it's, if ever people want to discuss this, I need help on this. It's really something I'm trying to develop. Okay, now how do we understand our point of extraction? The point of extraction is actually a point that has three zones, and at least this is the experience from Canada. So we have the point of extraction where you have your facilities, but then you have another space, which is the frontier, where your reserves are, where you're discovering, exploring. And then, very important, is you got to get the stuff out. You can extract, but if it sits in the middle of Alberta, it's not useful for anybody. So to get the stuff out, you have to secure corridors of circulation, and you have to develop interfaces with the market, with world markets, which is what we say when we say in Canada, get the tidewater. Most of our struggles have been here, and most of our victories are here. Here, it's very hard. And here, it's just violent, and it's just hell. But so most of our victories have actually been here, these choke points where they're trying to get the stuff out and we can block it. So when you look at gas, or I'm going to work also eventually on the forestry sector, then you can do this. You've got your frontier, your point of extraction, your corridor, and what are they doing? Are they deepening? Are they widening? Are they just reproducing it because they're letting it get used up because they want to phase it out? And you get very interesting insights on where, and I won't summarize everything in this, but where a promoter is, or where a given extractive industry is in function of this table. It's very useful analytically to understand how a corporation plays through these different, and I'll apply this now to natural gas in fracked gas in Canada, this framework, without getting again into the details. But for example, if we look at reproductive, just capital maintains and optimizes an existing system. Well, we have, like here in Germany, legacy pipeline systems that bring gas to houses, that bring gas to industry. Boring. We're going to get rid of most of that, we know, in the next 40 years. It's going to go away. So, it's boring. It's not going anywhere. There's no low growth, mature, it's stagnating. We also have our conventional gas system where we just let the gas come out of the earth, collect it in a tube and send it somewhere. Again, that is becoming more and more inefficient, and we have less and less of that amount of gas. And finally, we've got corporations that are sitting on conventional reserves and just looking at them as if they were balance sheet assets and using them to get capital from somewhere, but they're not doing anything more than that. So then widening. Well, widening is just basically we have this technology and we're using it to develop the sector. So we're investing in what we know. So all the exploration that is being done around the Montney right now is basically just widening. We know it's there. We just have to find out exactly how to get it out the right way. So, exactly what the configuration of each 3-kilometer horizontal drilling should be. So the technology is known. There's no investment, no innovation. We've developed what we call the standardized multi-pad drilling. That's what I showed you in the first slide, that picture. So we don't do these little wells anymore. That's 10 years ago. Now because of what was called back then the Red Queen syndrome, which I could always explain to you. But and finally, in our corridors, well, the widening is being widened out to data centers. That's the new frontier we're going towards. It's all about just getting it to somewhere where it can be converted into electricity. but there's no deepening in that. It's just making tubes and making them longer. So now the widening frontier that is really pulling out more gas is the behind the meter data centers. What about deepening? Well, deepening at the frontier are these advanced geological modeling techniques that are being developed. There's a project on an offshore gas project in Newfoundland that is going to be very challenging because they're going very deep, and they want to frack down there. So that's the new, and I learned this 2 months ago. This is the new thing for deep sea oil now and gas. They want to introduce fracking technologies. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but it's like kind of, so there you have some capital deepening. And then the advanced fracking, which is the longer laterals, the more complex chemistries that we're using. And then finally, and this is what we'll be talking about for the rest of the talk for the next 5 minutes, LNG. LNG is at the corridor level the space for capital deepening. So is so-called low CO2 gas, which is basically CCS tied to gas systems. So this gives us 3 sites of struggles that we work with or on. We try to shut down what's merely reproductive. We try to block the widening all the time. And we try to struggle at the new commodity frontiers. So when they try to come in a new territory and say, we'll explore this, there's maybe something that can be done there, then we try to, we often get provoked into these. Well, here we're on the offensive, but here and here we're reactive, we're on the defensive. In Germany, you don't extract much, so you don't get into these struggles, but we're always getting, oh, this now? So like right now, here, graphite, lithium, all these fancy new critical materials, they happen to be in areas in Quebec that where people live, and they're trying to get a way to dig them out. So we have the same struggles that you have elsewhere in the world that you'll never have here in Europe around these new materials. So these are the 3 types of struggles that we tend to have. Now, what are the dynamics in around gas in Canada? The core accumulation is widening to get as much out of the Montney, so this region that's bigger than the tar sands. And then at the point of extraction, it's the shift that you saw in the graph from conventional to advanced fracking. And then at the level of the corridors, it's the shift from legacy pipeline systems to LNG, floating LNG. That's how things are developing. Here's an example of one project which brings all this together, and I'm going to end on this project. It's the Extractivism's Prince, why I say PJRT, it's PRGT, sorry, Prince Rupert Pipeline Project. This is a new, you can't see it because of the sunlight, but it's, so we have, this is Vancouver, we have LNG facilities here, we have LNG facilities here, and this one would be up here. And here's Alberta, so it's basically 1,000 kilometers of pipes to bring it to the Pacific Ocean. What's special about this project is 3 things. One, the project separates the pipe system and the LNG facility. They're separate legal entities. Second, the LNG facility floats. They can take it off anchor and they can move it somewhere else. So it's liquid in the sense of a financial asset being liquid. Whereas the pipe, you can't do anything but, and the pipe only goes to the LNG facility. It doesn't go anywhere else. Third, there's almost 100% indigenous ownership of the pipe, but not the floating facility. Of course not. You don't want the indigenous ownership on that to be on 100%. You bring that down to 40% or 30% minority. So you've basically transferred the risk, the market risk, onto the pipe, and transferred that from the pipe to the indigenous communities, and transferred from the indigenous communities to the Canadian government, the market risk and the debt associated. Because the pipe has a financing structure based around bonds, and the floating facility has another financing structure, and they're totally separate because they're separate legal entities. The floating liquefaction facility is owned mostly by portfolio companies. So this is for us a new development, and here's because I worked on this for indigenous groups over there, and it's exactly the same type of project they want to build in Quebec to sell you guys in Germany, our LNG. And they're trying right now to negotiate with indigenous communities to get them to buy into the pipeline, but they want to keep ownership of the floating liquefaction facility. They want to keep that separate. It's exactly the same structure, and we know this because indigenous communities have given us the documents that were not public. So basically, you have a secured frontier upstream of extraction, which is in its widening phase. You have a creation of a corridor, which is a high risk area because it's tied only to one, it's bearing all the market risk, and it's basically just reproductive capital that's in there, so yields are very low. And then your deepening process is here at the interface, and that is not indigenously owned. And the risk of that aspect of it is transferred to the pipe because this floats and can be floated away and brought elsewhere. And then there's all the other ecological issues tied to all this that... So how does this... what's the paradigmic case of this model, which is the model that we're seeing in Canada? We've gone from contract-based projects to long-term bilateral arrangements between extractors and consumers of gas, with utilities as, yeah, almost done. 2 more slides. Utilities as anchor buyers and project-type finance, this very liquid pipeline chain, to this new model where you have a fragmented and risk and de-risking strategy, basically giving all the power of the project to the global portfolio actors. That's what we're seeing. So, and that explains why Shell just bought ARC. I mean, they wouldn't have bought it if they didn't have this model. They're securing, yeah, I don't have to go through that. I just want to finish on this. I have 2 slides. So you remember this here? So I applied this to gas, and I want to talk about the anti-pipeline movement in Quebec, and in Canada in general. So, yeah, I guess so this would have been interesting, but we've developed because I'm part of this movement, we've developed a playbook based on our knowledge of these structures: widening, deepening, reproductive, the corridor, and we knew the weakest point was always the corridor because there was no widening, nor it was really all about just reproductive. So the market risk was always high, and we always attacked the corridor. The other thing we knew is we knew when to attack, when to oppose these projects. There's 5 steps to a project. I'll read them here, but I'm sorry, I can't. You can't see them. But for a fossil fuel project to exist, you need a narrative, especially in today's world. So there's always a narrative: energy security, green gas, clean oil, freedom gas. Okay, so the first thing you do is you attack the narrative. You have to work and counterattack on the narrative. Then the second thing is, for this project to go through, they need to build a coalition of support. The coalition has to be local and has to be national. So then what you do is you wedge the coalition. You do everything you can to wedge it. You know, the way labor movement is tricky, but often local communities can be wedged against the fossil capital interests. If they have a coalition, if they have a narrative, then the third thing they need to go through regulatory processes. They have to have an environmental assessment. There, what you do is you try to lengthen that as long as you can so they lose money, and then you can work to break up the coalition during that process. That's the third step. That's where we're really good. And then the fourth thing is then if they do get past that, then they have to get finance. And to get finance, there's a risk assessment that's done. And if you can risk the project through opposition, then you bring the cost to finance the project higher. So that often makes banks shy away from these projects. If they get finance, then you're screwed, basically. Right? If they get finance, then they go FID, final investment decision. They start building, they start operating, and you're screwed. But there's really one thing that's important about this, and this is a Canadian talking to Europeans. There is a very romantic notion about sabotaging and blowing up pipelines, okay? It's very romantic. We in Canada have never won a struggle after FID. After the final investment decision, that's what you can do. Blow it up, you can sabotage it, you can do direct action, you can camp on the site of construction, you can try legal action. These tools, we've all lost our struggles with these tools. Never worked once. So this very romantic notion of blocking pipelines by doing direct action is not truly something that works. It's romantic, it's fun, you can write books about it, but in the real world, it's never blocked anything, okay? Of course, you need direct action in general. You need a radical wing in these struggles all the time, but they're not blowing things up. They're doing something else. Camps are important. You pre-camp the area where the pipeline is going to go, of course. You ally with indigenous people that set up. That's part of the struggle. But once they start digging, you're cooked. So our playbook was all about acting before they started digging. The problem is our fossil capitalists learned a lesson, and they put to power an investment banker from Brookfield. It was called Carney. And what did Carney do? Well, the first thing he did is he passed a law called C5, which is, this law says that projects of national interest are fast-tracked through the regulatory process. That's what he did this fall. What he did this week is he created a sovereign wealth fund that will de-risk and do prior finance for pipeline projects. So we've basically, and finally, he created a narrative around national security, and a narrative that ties our energy security, our economic security, which is our capacity to extract and to export, to the energy security of Europe, and especially Germany. So we're brothers together in this struggle against the Americans and against the Russians. So there we have to work collaboratively to be able to break up that narrative. My conclusion is, there's a bunch of stuff that's in there, but our conflicts have just, you can't even read it, have just got a lot harder to win because of these laws that Carney passed. So I want to conclude with in 30 seconds. What I tried to present was a general framework on socio-ecological relations in a capitalist society. I wanted to show how we could look at extraction with the tools of, let's say, post-Keynesian Marxian economics, and understand the accumulation process at that point. And then I ended with a more normative, I guess, part in my discussion, which was around working with social movements to try to direct the transition away from fossil fuels and the limits of that in the current context. And thank you very much for listening to me.